Good evening, and welcome to our latest edition of the Edgar Cayce On series. In this case, Edgar Cayce On automatic writing, channeling, and inspirational writing. The title kind of makes it seem like the only thing I'm going to speak about tonight has to do with things that are written down or people that verbally communicate what they gather from the other side, but there are a number of other ways that this goes about. For instance, you see these images around the opening slide here, and what they are when people go into a meditative state and they get images in their mind and they have artistic ability, they go ahead and transfer those images into what you see here in the opening screen. I know they're tiny right now, but you'll be able to see them in a larger form as I go on with the presentation. As always, the disclaimer here is to make sure that you understand that there is no official position, even from the Association for Research and Enlightenment's headquarters. The people that are in charge of the Edgar Cayce readings don't take an official position saying this is what the readings are trying to say. And we are not trying to do so either. Certainly I am not. What we are indicating here is that I've done the research of the readings on this, and this is my interpretation of it, and we welcome you to go ahead and you'll be able to see the reading numbers, etc., that you would be able to go and do your own research on it if you wanted to learn more about it and decide for yourself. It's funny, I taught college classes for a number of years, and I would get the same answer every time I would quiz the class on what did you like best about what I present. And inevitably, the number one thing that they had was that at the beginning of the class, I would put an agenda on the whiteboard and say, here's the agenda for what we're going to cover in today's course. And that's what they like best. So I admit I'm probably not the best public speaker in the world, but why would I not share with you the exact same thing that the class seemed to like so much in a live format? The similarities and differences between what automatic writing, channeling, and inspirational writing are all about is one of the topics that I'll start with. And then from there, we'll go into when is the appropriate time to use each one of those methods. And then I'll go into examples of what happens when we apply these methods correctly and incorrectly. Then I'll go into a quick overview of how to prepare for developing and using our own intuition, which Cayce says, by the way, intuition is the highest psychic ability that we can have. And then finally, I have an announcement I'm saving for the end as far as if you live here in the Phoenix area to be able to actually attend a live course that will teach you about the last one here, how to do inspirational writing. So when I see all of this, it reminds me of a humorous quote about the Cayce readings. It says, happiness is finding a Cayce quote that confirms what you already believe. And of course, the inverted part of that is true. If you were to find a Cayce quote that doesn't agree with what you already believe, then you have found the definition of unhappiness. So let's start with what the Cayce readings say is the definition of what is inspirational guidance that we get from the other side, and what is the definition of what automatic is. So inspirational, insert writing here if you will, but inspirational is that which slips into the consciousness when the mind is concentrating upon a subject. Poets, writers, and in other fields such as art and music. The material projected is, or much of it, that inspired from the other side. Okay, now let's go on to automatic. Automatic writing, quite different. Here, the mind is arrested, so to speak, and is but a channel, or what we might say, a funnel through which words slip down into the being of the one writing and picked up by the mechanism of the medium. There is also another type, one who becomes still physically and mentally, and whose hand alone is used by a force outside of the medium. So when we're talking about channeling, they actually come into the body and control the voice box and the words that come out of the mouth. In automatic writing's case, it means that they would just come in and move the pen or pencil around the paper in order to be able to get a message across that way. So we're going to go into this deeper and see what is the appropriate times to use either one of these methods. First of all, let's start off with what the Edgar Cayce readings recommend. So you can see I'm giving you the reading information so that you can look these readings up for yourself. They are verbatim unless I indicate otherwise. So this is a female, 20 years old, back in the middle 30s. And this Cayce quote was given to her. Let this rather ever be, as has been indicated, self-development rather than being directed by other influences that may arise in the experience from without. For the creative energies and forces have given those promises that are safe in him, that he will meet thee in thine inner self, and there may ye commune with him, and through him find that which will make for the greater spiritual, the greater physical, and the greater mystical development. What I get out of being able to see a reading quote like that, and this is underlining is my own emphasis on here, that we are looking for self-development. If we do not try to work on the self first in order to be able to get ourselves clear, then we're going to wind up trying to put the cart before the horse, so to speak. We need to be what it is that we're trying to teach others before we would attempt to do that. So go into self-development, and you also don't want to be looking to try to be directed by other influences outside of us until we've been able to take care of what's inside or who we are. So that's how I'm able to interpret that. And what you're seeing here are pictures, and you have the Ouija board, hands working there, and then a pendulum set up here, and then this is a sample of what it looks like when you have automatic writing coming through. So let's look at a couple of examples of these things and get into the specifics. This is not a question and answer that is given to an individual. It is a question and answer that was grouped into what are called the Psychic Sources series of readings in the Edgar Cayce readings, to be able to answer general questions for all, as opposed to just going to whatever a specific case of an individual would be. So the question is, classify writing as to development of psychic faculties. All right, so we're talking about inspirational and automatic writing here. And the answer is, one is as good as the other, depending upon the individual. Now, what I'm seeing here is that it's making it clear that there isn't one that excels above the others, depending on who the person is that's actually doing it. So there is an individual difference that it could be okay for one and not for another. And we'll be able to explore that in greater detail as we go on. But it does not say what source is being used for the automatic writing in this case. You could be automatic writing from anyone from a person who happened to pass over to the other side all the way up to the Christ consciousness. So you have a whole, shall I say, there's a spectrum involved in what kind of help you can get from automatic writing. All right, so now we're going to a specific individual this time that asked about it, and that is, please give counsel regarding the entity's automatic writing. So the answer, go slow, and only by his guiding counsel, his hope. May there come aid through such activity. In his name, let that which comes be given only in his name, only in his name. So when you look at this, it suggests that this woman could, and she's a 30-year-old female in 1933, and this reading suggests that automatic writing is just fine for this particular person. However, it doesn't indicate what would be the outside source if she were to do automatic writing. Where would that outside source come from? And as I said, you have this spectrum of where it can come from, and it depends on who winds up being first in line, so to speak through you. So Cayce himself actually had angels. I remember that there is the angel Michael, spoke a number of times through Cayce. So there was channeling in the Cayce readings. There was another highly placed angel, archangel, if you will, called Halaliel. And so I remember both of those angels actually speaking through Cayce. I do not recall personally even one experience in which there was an entity other than an angel that, or the Christ consciousness that spoke through Cayce, like a soul on the other side. So angels were essentially the only people that Cayce himself actually channeled through there. All right, so what did Jesus say about turning within for our answers? And this particular thing is something that Cayce pointed out that is a Bible quote. So if you're familiar, John 14 through 17 was one of the most personal passages in the Bible. Deuteronomy 30 is another. But John 14 through 17, the Cayce reading suggests that we read that as it was written directly to us. That is God telling us, read these things and take them very personally. It's not just general in nature, though it applies to everybody. It applies to each one of us in exactly where we are. So here's the quote. These things have I spoken unto you, being yet present with you. But the Comforter, which is the Holy Ghost, whom the Father will send in my name, he shall teach you all things, and bring all things to your remembrance, whatsoever I have said unto you. So, if you have a choice of meditating to get an answer, or asking Jesus, if he's physically standing in front of you, which one do you think you're going to take advantage of? Now imagine, you're going, well, that's a, of course we're all going to do the same thing. Jesus, I have a question, right? So you would go in that direction. But that is exactly what the disciples had in front of them. The people that were following him for 3 years always had Jesus standing in front of them, so when they had a question, there was Jesus to be able to answer it. How many times do you think that they had an important question in their life, that they wound up taking it into meditation and making a connection with the divine within and asking God what would be the best for them? Why would you when there's Jesus standing right in front of you? Okay, so it makes sense as far as why that happened, but it also makes sense as far as what is Jesus saying to his disciples right here. He's saying, if I don't leave, you are not going to allow the Holy Spirit to infuse every fiber of your being, to be able to make that connection with God and get the perfect guidance for you at each and every moment with each and every question of your heart. And so I think this is making it very clear that even when you have Christ incarnate standing in front of you, the best way, even better than just asking Jesus standing there, is to figure out how to be able to do this for yourself. Now, there is another statement that Jesus made in the Bible that says, these things and greater you will do. The things that I have done, you will do and greater. So when you think about that, how are we going to wind up being able to do things as Jesus did and even greater if we do not become like him? If we don't freely make that direct connection with God instead of having to go, Jesus, do you have an answer for me? If you don't have that intuitive guidance that is available to you at every moment, then you wind up having to depend on somebody else. And even if that somebody else is the Christ consciousness who is very willing to answer our questions, it does mean that we are having to kind of bypass being able to make that direct connection within. So it's a very important point in the readings, and especially explains why did Jesus have to go away at that particular point if the disciples themselves were to grow. Okay, so this is a female, 44 years old, back giving specific examples here. All right, to this particular entity, the mystic or the hidden life is of the greater interest. So they really like to be able to get into psychic things. And there is often seen and experienced by the intuitive influences of the body, those experience that to others, whom the entity even express self to, are not understood or comprehended. And these become confusing at times, even to the entity. So the entity has been getting psychic impressions, psychic information, and they've even talked about it with other people, and they find the information that comes in confusing. That's what I've gotten out of this so far. So as we find, these may be the better acquired, the better obtained, the better understood, even by self, were they obtained in the manner as of automatic writing. And here's an example of automatic writing up here of some other outside force being able to guide the pen or pencil. Best that this be done, of course, alone and in the small hours of the morning or in the early twilight, always in shadows. Okay? By the way, this is one of the Cayce readings I'm not real fond of, but when asked what is the best time for us to be able to meditate, Cayce said 2 a.m. of your local time. Now, of course, that would be difficult to get up from a sound sleep, start meditating, and expect to be able to have a great experience, but I do know people who do that and do it very successfully. So in case you were wondering, when's the best time? 2 a.m. However, Cayce was also asked, what is the best form of meditation? And he didn't come back and say with incense and candles and chanting and music at 2 a.m. He said the one that you will do daily. All right? So if we will meditate daily, figure out the meditation form that works for you, and be able to follow up on that as often as possible. So my understanding of what we're looking at up here is that this person didn't really trust what their impressions or their interpretation was of the psychic, telepathic, if you will, information that was coming through to them. And so in this particular case, this person should do automatic writing because when it comes out in written form, it's kind of like, now I can look at this and say this is an objective thing instead of my own interpretation, and that I have a lot more trust in it when it comes out to be automatic writing. So that's actually the person that comes up in this, I don't know if you, especially the folks at home and your YouTube audience out there, I did a presentation on Edgar Cayce on pets, angels, and elementals. And in there, if you had seen that presentation, you wind up having a family, 4 family members actually had readings from Cayce, and each one of them asked about the family dog named Mona. So if you remember that, Mona happened to have been, when they asked, said, you know, Mona seems to be this little tiny thing that's just very aggressive, you know, and very protective. And it turned out that the patriarch or father of the family had a previous incarnation, I believe it was a Roman soldier, and that Mona was accompanying him as the general of armies or whatever into battle, and except that lifetime Mona was a lion. So a little more formidable, but Mona probably still thought she was a lion, and therefore very defensive and very protective of the family. So this is, again, this sort of thing is coming back to this particular entity even in this lifetime. If we don't trust the guidance that we have within us, then trying to do it through automatic writing. Now, Cayce didn't say that this automatic writing here necessarily comes from an outside entity. It may just be an angel, the Christ consciousness. It may just be us, instead of trusting our own interpretation of what we see in our minds as far as the images, that we go ahead and write it out, and it somehow solidifies it. Now, I can tell you, I can understand how this would work very well as long as we're getting the information from the divine within, as opposed to saying, let's have somebody from outside come in here and try to explain life to me. All right? So now we have a 42-year-old male, again in 1933, asking, is my automatic writing inspired, and how can I develop it to the best advantage? So the answer, as we have indicated, this is rather the harking of the mental development of self through the experience when the entity was the scribe to those of many lands and many positions and many tongues that sought counsel. In developing same, depend and call upon rather that of the universal than the independent influence. Now, to me, I interpret this as saying that this man had been, what would we call that, a psychic scribe in the past, in which, as we go to psychics today, this was somebody that was sought, that his counsel was sought in many places, in many languages, and that he has long practiced automatic writing. And so the Edgar Cayce readings recommended that he could still do this. He could get that information from the divine within rather than any other independent influence. Okay, so this is indicating that even if you're doing automatic writing, it doesn't have to be from the wrong source. All right, so that's, by the way, this guy is interesting because he apparently, even though this is in a contemporary life with Cayce, he, in a past life, he had been a good friend to Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin's in a current contemporary life with Cayce had also been told that he was Ben Franklin in a past life. So these two were associated together back in the Revolutionary War times. Next example here, the question is, are the inspirational writings I receive to be relied upon as coming from a worthy and a high source, or should I not cultivate this form of guidance and information? Answer, we would, in the infamy, by the way, I want to point out when you see in all caps, this comes from Gladys Davis Turner's emphasis, and she is taking down the dictation to indicate when a real emphasis from Cayce himself wound up happening on the words. So when you see in all caps, this is not me bringing this out. This is somebody that was there live when the reading was given, putting emphasis on the words that Cayce gave. So we would not from here counsel anyone to be guided by influences from without, for the kingdom is from within. If these come as inspirational writings from within and not as guidance from others, that is different. So this clarifies that automatic writing and inspirational writing, even though those are two different things, it is two different things when we're talking about it coming from a different source. If it's coming from the divine within, automatic writing is very similar to inspirational writing. But if we're allowing an outside force, an outside entity, an outside influence to be the one that takes over the body, and I have a reading that really deals with that well here down the road a bit, you're going to say, now you're not talking to the highest guidance that's available. It's like if you have two books sitting in front of you. I remember my father talking about he had an encyclopedia so old that if you were to look up the substance radium, the radioactivity, active stuff that Madame Curie had come up with, if you were to look up radium, it would say a useless radioactive substance, and that was all that was given in the dictionary, in the encyclopedia that he had at that particular time. They had no idea what all the uses were going to be for it. And so what I'm indicating there is that if you can go and you have two encyclopedias, and one is from more current times of now, one back when we first discovered it, which one do you think you're going to get more information from? I use that as an analogy to be able to say, what source would you rather get it from? The highest source available, or from the first thing that walks along, in that particular case, willing to talk about the subject. So again, this is information that goes to anyone. It says we wouldn't counsel anyone to be guided by influences from without. So that one is very general in nature, that says to everybody, this is my basic guidance. He has, and I've already given you a couple of examples of when automatic writing is indicated that it could be okay for individuals. Not because they're getting information from an outside source, but because automatic writing is the way that the information is able to come out of them, and they will trust it and use it. Who can learn to do automatic writing? So let me point out here, this could be a little confusing. This reading actually came from the 262 series, which were the readings that Edgar Cayce gave that put together what are called the Search for God books, books 1 and 2, they're now combined, of 24 chapters that show us how to live a better life, and that we read them in small groups to be able to figure out how to apply what's in those books. So that's where this question was asked. However, the question was being posed by this person whose Edgar Cayce reading number is 2125, is a female of 62 years old. So the question was, could I develop automatic handwriting? The answer, anyone could. All right, Cayce doesn't often have answers that are just that short, sweet, and that definitive. All right, a few times that it comes up and says, what about tithing? How much should we tithe? 10%, as all should. Bam, it just hits it that quickly. So can anyone develop automatic handwriting? Anyone could. Very clear about that, and it's not just 2125, right? So the member of group 1, that's a very spiritual group of people that came together to put those books together, by the way. So they asked that question, and the answer being anyone can. But what does that mean when it comes to where we go within? I mean, does that say that we're going within when we develop automatic handwriting, or are we going without? So we cannot get greater information than we ourselves have attained. That was, we'll see this later in another reading. But what I'm trying to indicate here is that if we're sitting there and we're going, gee, I'd like my 15 minutes of fame, is a good reason why this comes up from time to time. And they go, I would like to be a channel of blessings to others. And so if I open myself up to be a channel, and a great soul or angel comes in and starts speaking through me, I would be blessed to be able to offer this information to other folks. Well, the problem is that if it's kind of like trying to teach somebody something that we haven't learned ourselves. And so we will only be able to draw to us enough of a information or a source outside of ourselves that is about where we are. Certainly it could be lower, but probably not higher. And so that's really important when you're looking at this. If anybody can develop automatic handwriting, and we see that that's very clear here, how are we going to wind up knowing if the information is good or not? So let's move on from here and see where that takes us. This is, again, it's the same person that had asked the previous question, even if it's in the 262 readings here. So you told me that anyone could do automatic writing. Would you please tell me how I may develop it? So the answer, by practice, sit alone with pencil and paper and let that guide that may be sought or may come in direct. Okay? It will come. Anyone may. But is it the better? May oft be the question. This may only be the better when surrounding self with those influences that may bring those of the constructive forces alone. So, indicating here, once again, we're not talking about who or what, we're just saying constructive forces to be able to come in and be able to help us out. And we are not able to channel better information, or as far as our spiritual development is what we are going to attract to us. That is why we make the connection with the divine within. The divine within is that part of us that has never left God. It is omniscient, it is omnipotent, it is simply encased in the shell of our ego, our bodies, our poor selfish choices that have, in a sense, for our own safety and others, blocked us off from being able to cause great damage to other people if and when we make the wrong choices out there. It'd be kind of like taking that presidential football with the nuclear launch codes in it and setting it in front of a 5-year-old with a big red button there and saying, don't press that button. Well, why don't you just not give them the football in the first place, right? That's the better part of reason and logic and safety for everybody. And so that's why we wind up having that divine within, even though it has all this potential, is not allowed to manifest unless we go seeking with the correct intention. So that we go in there and say, I'm only going to use this for the greatest good, and suddenly the answers of our heart are given to us for that reason, because we're not going to cause chaos and harm. All right, so we're very clear here in the readings that we will get information if we open ourselves to automatic writing, but it's possible if we don't do this in the best manner possible that the Christ consciousness itself isn't going to be what helps us out. You see this little picture I took from The Tonight Show with Jay Leno. Do you remember jaywalking, in which he'd just take the cameras and the mic out in the like Universal City Walk shopping center, and he'd go out there and he'd start interviewing people off the street, and they just have the most incredible answers to things, and you're going, really? You don't know who the Vice President of the United States is? Or, you know, some such like that. And so you go out and look at this interview segment that Jay Leno would do over there, and you start to become very concerned about, oh my gosh, these are the people that I'm walking side by side with out there in the real world. So it is interesting, all right? Keep an eye on the graphic over here, because it makes a real point in a bit as far as what we do with the intuitive guidance we get. All right, so the information received through, and of course this is saying who the information or where the information came from. Mr. 317 was doing automatic writing and presented this information on what was called I think it's an etheronics machine. Yeah, an etheronics machine. I'll explain what that is in a minute. So, he said last night gave this information, and that the following numbers on the right-hand dial, it was a little round dial if we went from 0 to 100, be applied to the body. And then it says if you do these numbers for the head and mind, these numbers for the thorax, these for the abdomen, and these for the limbs, is this information that was channeled through automatic writing correct? Now here's a fascinating answer from Cayce. At times it will be correct, and at times it will be very far wrong. All right, this is for a 45-year-old female, again in 1934. Now, this drawing itself doesn't have anything to do with this reading specifically, but what I want to say is what if you're in the meditation and you start getting these images in your mind, and this is exactly where this came from. A person in meditation was getting these various images that you see coming up on this moving graphic right here. So when you're seeing this and you're going, well, what would you make out of that? If this person is enough of an artist to be able to give a rendering of what all these different images are and then try to put them together like a motion picture, what kind of a message do you get out of this? And what I'm indicating right here is that we can get a number of things that come through us, come through automatic writing when we are trying to answer questions, but the next thing you know, you can come up with a very definitive answer in case he says, well, guess what? Yes, it can be right at times, and at times it will be very off. And so we have to be very careful. Remember Cayce, when it's kind of an interesting statistic, I want to say, of Cayce giving remedies for basic ailments, and whether you would say it's like arthritis or or shingles or something like that, that he typically didn't have more than about 2/3 of the same information for all of the people that asked about that ailment. In other words, there was about 33% of it that had a very different diagnosis, or not diagnosis, but therapy for being able to cure whatever the challenge was. And so this is fascinating to me, that there wasn't just one universal answer for everybody to be able to fix whatever the ailment was, no matter how common the ailment was for each of the people asking. So there was only about 2/3, or up to 2/3 of the information in the readings as far as how to cure that was applied to the people out there. As much as 33% or more wound up having a different answer that was going to work best for them. So so the answer here, as far as from Mr. 317, was going to be off or on, depending on who the person was, what the one that was going to be healed, etc., was probably going to get the information that was very far wrong, as far as Cayce's quote is right there in the future. So let's move on and go to the next question. What should I do with the essays given me by Longfellow? And yes, they do mean Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. And apparently this person was doing automatic writing and felt that they were receiving, that they were channeling through automatic writing Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Cayce's answer to this is fascinating. Answer: whose Longfellow gave these? Art thou sure from whence these came? Are they not rather those of thine own surroundings in the earlier days of thy application of thine own mental self in relation to those that soon passed over? These are too great a question. These are too great a question, comma, yet they may be used for those things that make for understandings to others. Okay, so once again, the Cayce readings here are questioning the accuracy of the source's information through this automatic writing or channeling. Cayce does indicate that yet they may be used for those things that make for understandings to others. So in other words, it's not that the information that they were getting from the other person was wrong. They're just saying, it's not Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. As a matter of fact, you were dealing with people that were alive when you first started working with trying to do automatic writing. They passed away to the other side, and then they started being the people that you channeled coming through. And I guess you all had an affinity for Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, and so they go, if we add this little caveat to the thing, it's going to perhaps get people's attention and be able to offer a reputation to go behind just the words themselves. And so yes, those may be used for the greater understandings for others, but it didn't mean that it was actually Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. So you wonder if people say that they're channeling a famous person from history. Are they really, or are they just trying to make sure that the person from the other side is coming through and says, and if I tell you that I was St. Francis or somebody like that, that you wind up getting more credibility to go along with the guidance that's there. So that's an important concept to keep in mind as well. A male, 42 years old, 1936, asked, to further my work, impossible radio reception of cosmic messages, should I attempt to train myself in automatic handwriting or use a medium? Okay, so this guy's already out there thinking that radio waves allow us to be able to, especially through telepathy, to be able to communicate telepathically with other life forms. So here's the answer. As has been indicated, rather than automatic writing or a medium, turn to the voice within. If this then finds expression in that which may be guided by an influence outside of self, then that's good. It is well. For the universe, God is within. Thou art his. Thy communication with the cosmic forces of nature, thy communion with the Creator, is thy birthright. Be satisfied with nothing less than walking with him. So it's clear that the Cayce readings prefer to seek information from within. We certainly covered that enough here. And it's much better than going with other trying to attract an ethereal source outside of that, whether it be an angel or another soul or a discarnate entity of some sort. But the question is, why? I mean, why won't we get the best information possible if we come asking with a pure heart and intent? I get that question most often when people go, but I've had great information coming from channeled sources out there. And so why is it that if I can get it from the one source, and yet when I try to go within, I don't seem to be able to get the information? Why is it working that way? It is a good question. All right, so let's go ahead and talk, we'll explore that in another couple of examples here. So a female, 37 years old, asked the question, do I have any psychic ability, such as a gift for automatic writing, which I can develop, and is this desirable? So Cayce's answer, as we find, it is more desirable to develop inspirational writing than automatic. Yet there is the tuning within in the fields of activity, as we have indicated, especially through those periods outlined. This should become as an inspired activity. Do not trust to automatic, for it opens the self to low influences. Now, you remember my point before as far as saying what in terms of a vibration. Let's say, here's a good example. If you were to have a tuner, let's say a radio tuner, would you be able to tune in television stations? I don't know if you've ever been through all of that, but radio waves are operating at this level and television waves are operating at this level. So what would happen is that if you are a radio receiver, that you can't get any vibrations that are higher than where the radio waves transmit. And higher information is available from television, because not only would you be able to get the audio, but you get the video to go along with it as well. And one picture is worth 1,000 words, as you've heard, okay? So if you think of it in those terms, when it talks about do not trust automatic, for it opens the self to low influences, remember, you have this whole range of radio waves, and you have some that are really high and some that are really low. And then the quality of the sound that comes through makes a real difference because of whether it's AM or FM. Okay, so FM is the higher frequencies, and you get a much clearer signal that comes through from that, and the music sounds much better and all that. And AM is kind of relegated to sports and talk radio anymore because the audio is not so good, and they broadcast on a lower frequency. If we make that analogy to what our frequency or our spiritual development is, and we can only get up to radio waves, look at all the information that comes in on TV that is available to us if you can attain to that level. But if we are not able to receive television waves, there you go. So if we've opened ourselves to low influences, it's very possible that on a bad day, you can wind up bringing a lower source of information to you than the highest that we're capable of. But the divine within is always in connection with God, and it opens itself up to us and gives us the answers to our heart's desires and questions when we go ahead and make that connection in the right way. So it makes I'll give you a couple of examples later on, but I grew up in a family, my mother was kind of like a Western representative of the United States for the Edgar Cayce organization for my entire life growing up in home. And so she ran into a number of people that had problems with just this, that they would be channeling automatic writing, and it was almost like a con man, that the person's information would be full of hope and love and light when it first started, and then the next thing you know, it starts to turn ugly. The next, it would be all of this good information, and then they'd say, and by the way, your spouse is cheating on you, when the spouse wasn't cheating on them. And they just wanted to watch the fireworks explode, and the person, the entity, the low influences on the other side, just wanted to watch the fireworks. It would come up and feel like, look what I can do. And so there are not always wonderful people on the other side, and you can wind up having them if you open yourself up to it on a bad day, as I said. Will you give some suggestions that will help individuals who seek to develop themselves? So again, this is going back not for an individual question, but for the Psychic Sources series of readings. And so this is going to be more general of an answer. Let such individuals seek. Then that which is for their needs may be given. But as for an individual giving what will help another, this is rather presumptuous. It is almost as bad as an individual seeking to choose a friend to choose your wife, or choose a friend to choose your friend, or choose a friend as to how that you shall worship your God. Choose the friend as to how that you should act in any of your associations or relations with your inner higher self. you may seek for yourself. Okay, I love this perspective because it gives us a reinforcement of why we should go for the Christ consciousness only. I mean, I've been married to my lovely wife, Stephanie, for over 37, 38 years, 37, sorry. And I couldn't imagine somebody going to, I forget, what are they called, a yenta or something in the Jewish side, where you would have a woman that would go out there and figure out who is the best, an arranged marriage of the best girl and guy of their community to be able to put them together. I couldn't imagine that somebody should go out there and choose my spouse for me, or my friends for me, or how I should worship God for me. And yet, if we're opening ourselves to outside entities, outside sources, to be able to answer these questions of our heart, aren't we putting our decision-making capability into their hands? Isn't that really what's coming up, as opposed to we get the information that they want to give us and see what happens with it, as opposed to the information that is for our greatest help and hope in our own lives. So this is, it kind of reminds me, it doesn't mean that it can't come from channeled information or for other people. For instance, if we're sitting there and we're asking God in a meditation for the answer of, let's say that you are in California and you're afraid that a big earthquake is coming, and you're trying to get guidance as to whether you should leave California or not. Well, the answer to your prayer may not come in meditation. It may come in a job offer that takes you out of the state. Or it may come in no form at all, because no earthquake's going to happen to begin with, and there's no reason to disrupt your life out of fear when there's really nothing that's going to interfere with your continuing to live there. So that's kind of a direction to think of it in that way. Okay, so now we're back to the prayer, well, actually I haven't dealt with this in this particular segment, but the prayer group series of readings, the Glad Helpers, the people that were part of Cayce's inner circle that were specifically the Glad Helpers that wanted to be able to concentrate on healing others through prayer. So that's where these questions and answers came from. So the first question is, what is the significance of the flashes and forms which I frequently see? So one of the people that was a member of this prayer group that was around Cayce was seeing flashes and forms around themselves all the time. And Cayce answered, those of higher vibrations of inter-between, as well as spiritual forces taking forms in or before the mental self. So he was validating that these flashes and forms that this individual was seeing are of a higher vibration than us in these dense physical bodies here on Earth. So they were ethereal beings or manifestations beyond three-dimensional Earth. So here the next question comes up, should I develop automatic handwriting? Here's a fascinating answer that goes along with the previous question and answer. We would not advise it. Too easily is it misleading, especially when there are so many flashes about. Rather, that of intuitive force that may be guided by higher sources. So in other words, Cayce's making it very clear that there are outside sources here and that they were seen in the form of flashes and other forms, apparitions or whatever you want to call it there, that are not part of the three-dimensional world. And Cayce's going to develop automatic handwriting when these people are actually hanging around you trying to make contact. Well, who do you think you're going to get if you start doing automatic handwriting? So of course that's what's going to happen when that comes out, when it comes down to trying to do it like that. But if you go with the intuitive forces, once again, you're not having your friend choose your spouse or your religion, you're going to the divine within and getting the information you need directly from God. All right, so now we have a 44-year-old female, 1937. Is my writing inspirational or automatic? Answer, it becomes very poor if you even consider automatic. It must be inspirational. Ye cannot give that which does not shine through that ye do. All right, so Cayce's being very clear that if we don't live as we believe, remember my talk about the radio and the TV, different frequencies that they operate on, Cayce's making it very clear that we can't offer to other people that which we are not already trying to live ourselves, so that we can see television information in the waves that are out there instead of settling for the lesser radio waves that are out there. All right, so this is making it very clear that it should always be inspirational writing. Now, does that mean, as we saw in the case of that one, remember the lady with Mona the dog, in which you said, you know what, you're getting all the right information, but you're not trusting it unless you actually write it down through automatic writing. In that particular case, it worked out, it was making sense for that person to do automatic writing because it would be the divine within that would be guiding the hand as opposed to an outside source or influence. All right, so it's kind of a fine line there to be able to figure it out, but it is what it is. From what source does my inspirational writing come? Answer: as has been indicated from the beginning, that of the own soul's development. Seek not through an individual channel. Let these as thy warnings be. Thou knowest in whom thou hast believed. Thou knowest he is able to keep that which he has committed unto thee in his promises to thee for any trial, for any emergency, for any expediency that may come into thine experience. Know then that self, through his illumination in thine inner self, will bring to thee that necessary. Let the Christ child be thy inspiration ever. Now this is interesting because this particular person, 489-4, 53-year-old female, is a contemporary of Cayce, was told in other places in that reading that they had been Saint Veronica in a past life. Now, if you're not Catholic and really up on the saints, Saint Veronica was apparently the past incarnation. She was a woman named Veronica when Jesus was taking the cross up to Mount Calvary and he had slipped and fallen. She took her, I guess, scarf and handed it to him to be able to wipe, clean his face and take the sweat off and all that. And when she got the scarf back, that it had the image of Jesus's face on the scarf. And I guess she did enough other spiritual things in that lifetime to become canonized, I think is the word. I'm not Catholic, so if I got that wrong, please forgive me. But that she became Saint Veronica at that particular time. But she is being warned here, specifically her, not everybody in general, but she's being specifically warned not to attempt to contact any source except for the Christ consciousness. So what about pendulums? All right, and if you've ever seen one of these things, when somebody's holding a pendulum out there and you ask a question and then it'll start swinging, and just like on a Ouija board where they have a yes or no, or you wind up having the alphabet right there, and in the outside, if you can see 190, 80, 70, and so on, it's indicating if you needed like a percentage of something, like you say, okay, how spiritual is this individual, and it comes over here to 100, you're probably talking about Jesus. And then there could be lesser numbers. I've seen people use these before, and it's kind of incredible to watch it happen. But what is the source of a pendulum swing? I mean, when I'm looking at this and I'm going, okay, how about if I had too much coffee that morning? Couldn't I wind up making that pendulum swing just because my hand's going to start doing, jittery things along with too much caffeine? And just as with anything else, where is that information coming from? And are you really, if you just take the pendulum and you hold it out there, are you really making a connection with the divine within? Or is it the coffee jitters? Or is it some other entity that you've already opened a connection with that can just step in that quickly and make the thing swing? Doesn't mean the information is wrong, but it is just, as Cayce said before, you are opening up the possibility to connecting with a lower source. So always, when you're making important decisions, go ahead and make a connection with the divine within, is the point here. So now we are back into this series of readings was for another study group that had started after the first one, and that this was a particular individual, female, 19 years old, number 562, who was asking the following question: what is the source of the automatic writing I have received, and should I develop this? Now, I've got a few 3 asterisks down here to be able to show there was a very long answer, and I just condensed it down with the asterisks, indicating there's a lot more verbiage in there that I cut out so they could all fit on the screen here. So understand what those are. As has been given, there are the influences from without and the influences from within. Those influences that are about thee are for good, but rather ever let that which thou would gain through thy writing be inspired by the best in self, as magnified through the Christ, than any entity or spirit or soul. If the blind lead the blind, both shall fall into the ditch. And if he uses other influences, he will direct same. All right? This is a fascinating overall answer to the whole thing, because recap it for a second. It said, all right, we want to go within. And the influences that you have around you are in fact good. Even though they're outside influences, you're being surrounded by very good people here, or very good entities. But the problem is that if it's somebody who is on the path and, here in the earth, just like us, doesn't happen to be in a physical body right now, can't they make mistakes as well? So if the blind is leading the blind, aren't you both going to fall in a ditch if you're trying to follow the advice of somebody that's not necessarily any better informed than you are? They just happen to be on the other side. Now let me clarify something for a moment as far as, if you were on the other side, do you wind up having this omniscience come to you altogether? And I would have to clarify that with an analogy. Let's assume for a moment you're kind of on a path in a forest. And so you're walking along, and the path has these winding things, winding road in front of you, a little dirt path going out, and you can't see very far ahead. But what if you were to go and be able to rise up above where you can see the tree level and see where the path is going to wind up going up ahead? Now, we have a physical body, and our astral selves are not limited by the physical laws of 3 dimensions, as in gravity. All right, so if we're here and we can raise our consciousness up, you get to see farther along in the path, don't we? All right, doesn't mean that we're any brighter than we were. We just have a different perspective that allows us to see a little bit farther down. Doesn't mean that we're able to see all the way to the end goal out there. And so whereas they may be helpful to be able to say, well, here's what's going to happen in the next day or two, but I don't know how that's going to wind up, manifesting a couple of years down the road, that's a decent example or analogy of what's going on in a case like this. Now, we have, you're probably familiar with Teresa Caputo, and I'll come up to a story that involves her in a moment as far as what happens when you're using a medium and so on. But let me give you a scenario of a personal experience of someone that I know. All right, so this particular woman was vexed by the question of why they were going through a painful health issue in their life. In fact, a woman admitted that she was in so much pain all of the time, she was just becoming ambivalent as to whether to go on or not. Not that she was contemplating suicide, but just, oh God, take me, I don't want to deal with this anymore. So that's how bad it had gotten to her. And she was very spiritual, very metaphysical minded, and she would go into a meditative state and she would ask for the answers that would be able to cure her. Now, the problem was that when she would go into a meditative state, she wasn't getting anything that she thought, well, the things that I'm getting are not doing me any good. I don't feel like that those are the answers that are going to make things better for me. So what she did was she started to look for the answers from channeled sources. There was a person in particular that channeled a doctor who had passed over to the other side. And this doctor wasn't just AMA kind of doctor, but more of a metaphysical doctor that said, if you were to accept and believe these particular things and be able to release all the negativity within yourself that's causing these illnesses, that you'll get better. Now, fascinating thing was, when she heard that information, she did release those things. She indeed did respond to it and got better, and the pain went away. All right, so she's telling me this story after the whole thing happened, because she was asking, but channeled information did wonderful things for me. Now, it was only afterward when I wound up asking her the question, I said, but in the wording of how you had this experience and the way it unfolded, it sounded to me like you said you actually got that information way back up here when you were in the meditative state, and that you were getting the information, but it was only after you got it through the channeled state from this person in a channeled state that gave you this channeled information from the other person, that you actually believed the guidance that you were receiving earlier, and through that you were able to let go of the negativity that was causing the illness within you. And she goes, well, you're right, but if I hadn't had the channeled person give it to me, I was just going to go on in pain. I said, so you've nailed it right there. Now, you remember that joke in which the floodwaters were coming and the guy's in his house and the policeman comes up and knocks on the door and he says, we're evacuating everybody out of the area because a flood's going to come and you'll drown in it. And the guy goes, oh no, I trust that God's going to provide for me. And so he gets up on the second floor of his house and the floodwaters rise and somebody comes by in a boat and they go, get in the boat. The floods are even going to get higher than this. You're going to drown. And the guy goes, God is going to provide for me. Gets on the roof and a helicopter comes by ready to go ahead and haul him up on a cable. He refuses that as well, saying, God is going to provide for me. And then the guy drowns. And he goes up to heaven and says, God, I was so faithful and you didn't provide for me. And of course, God says, I sent you a policeman, a boat, and a helicopter. How much can I do when you just keep refusing what it is that I'm offering you in order to be able to save your life? Well, he had already presupposed what it was that he had to receive in order to be able to overcome the problem. So I would suggest if we're ever asking God to help us and we have a suggestion for how God could do that for us, that we say, here's one thing you could do, God, or better. Leave it up to God how we're going to get the answer to our prayers. And I think God will know how to be able to best answer that, not necessarily following our direction. Now, in terms of another situation, and if you're familiar with the Long Island Medium television show, Teresa Caputo is a medium that is able to, and consciously, be able to give you messages from people that have passed over on the other side, often family members or friends. And in this one case, she went into a house not really knowing what the situation was ahead of time. She goes, well, okay, as a husband and wife, says, I have a child stepping forth, and apparently this is your child, and they both were very teary and said, yes, that's correct. And apparently the child had drowned. And as the story unfolded, it turned out that the mother was away, probably at work or something, and the father was home watching this, I think maybe 6 or 8 year old child who was autistic. And he was on the phone at the particular time, and the kid gets out of his sight, falls into the pool in the backyard, and drowns. Now, the fascinating thing was the kid saying, hey, I'm fine. You know, I'm not really autistic. I'm the spirit on the other side right now telling you, not only am I fine, I don't have the challenge of autism anymore. It was just for that incarnation, and I was done. It was time for me to be able to be released from that body. And here was the fascinating part that she brought out that I found was so healing that it would have been very difficult for them to be able to figure out. And that is, why did it happen on the husband's shift? And Teresa Caputo came back and said, because he can handle it better than you. In other words, the woman was so angry at her husband for not paying complete attention to the child and feels like it was completely his fault that the child drowned. And the child was saying one thing, it was time for me to get out, and you weren't doing me any favors if you kept me in that autistic body when it's time for me to move on. So that was the first thing. And it happened on Dad's shift because Dad was psychologically better prepared to handle feelings of guilt and being able to understand it. It's certainly on a higher level, but even on a conscious level, that certain things go in the direction that God wants them to go. And that Dad was able to handle it despite all of the hate and the blame that was coming from the wife out of this thing. And you could see between them as Teresa Caputo is sharing this with him, the father's going, what a weight that is being released off of me because I wound up getting this information. And you could tell with the woman, she couldn't let go. She's like, she didn't say it out loud, but you could just see it in her face. I've been hating him and blaming him for so long, I don't know how to let go of this whole thing. But it did give him this channeled information, the opportunity to be able to heal that marriage. I have no idea if they did or not, because that was the end of the show. But they never did go back to revisit it to know. But this is the kind of information that can come in through a channeled source that can be very healing. It's certainly for the husband, perhaps for the wife, and for the relationship when it does. John Edward is another medium, much like Teresa Caputo. And, well, this is another, I'm saying it very clearly, this true scenario that I'm about to give you had nothing to do with John Edward. All right, he just happens to be up there as being another example of a medium. So a woman was very disappointed that an expensive and respected psychic had given her a quote-unquote nothing reading. In other words, she had spent $40 at a psychic fair and found the one that was the most respected out there, and that's the one that she went to, and she was trying to keep a poker face and not give him any feedback and just let him give the reading. And she goes, I got nothing that felt like it was of value. So my response to that was, did you know that that is the best thing that could have happened to you? And she's looking at me, I just wasted $40. I said, yeah, but what would have happened had that psychic been really good? You would have just sat there with a poker face, not giving them any feedback, and they start giving you answers to questions that you've long had in your mind. How many questions are you going to answer for yourself by turning within after you have that? And she kind of looks at me, and then you could see her eyes get a little bit wider, as in, I don't know why I would ever ask another question if I found somebody like Jesus standing before the disciples who's there to be able to give me a very definitive answer without me having to sit in the silence and make a connection with the divine within. So it's fascinating to watch the realization come over somebody like that. Now, I'm almost like an AA mentor, so Alcoholics Anonymous mentor, in that I actually found myself falling into this trap in the past. When I was much younger, I would actually go to psychics more, not because I was checking information, but because I was fascinated by them and wanted to see how they were operated, what made them tick, who was good, what does it look like when they're not good. And by the way, if anyone ever tells you to go get all your money out of the bank because it's cursed and they'll remove the curse after you give them the cash to get the curse off of it, don't do that. But that's typical of what happens with the psychic readers out there that are simply in it for the money. Just warning you on that side. Okay, but in this case, I found a psychic. I won't go into a long story about it, but I found out this person could pretty much answer any question that I asked them. And I found myself for a period of about 2 years, and it was almost like a frog putting in a pan of water brought to boil where you don't actually notice it's happening to you. And the next thing I realized, I had gone a couple of years in which all of my questions were being asked of this psychic instead of turning within. And once I recognized that, what was kind of funny was that the next time that I went in to see the guy, which was I'd already made the appointment when I decided not to see him again, so I was going to go in and say goodbye. Before I could ever say goodbye, he goes, "This is going to be your last appointment." And he was that good. He recognized that I had gotten in touch with the lesson that was available to me to not be looking for answers outside of myself, and that I was able to go back in and start doing inspirational writing through meditation and prayer again after that. I haven't seen him since, but I certainly have talked about him a lot. He's a fascinating individual. All right, so here's a kind of an interesting way of taking secular thinking and putting it into Cayce terms. This quote comes from Albert Einstein, and then I reworded it down here as I think Edgar Cayce's readings would have had the same statement to make. The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. Now, if I were to take this and put it into Cayce terms, that same statement up there might sound like this. Our connection to the divine mind of God, the ultimate creative mind, is a sacred gift. Our conscious minds should heed the advice we receive from our sub and superconscious minds, but we often choose to ignore any sources that are unproven with our five senses. All right, so why do we prefer automatic writing or pendulums or mediums or anything that comes from outside of us? It's because it came from outside of us, and we don't trust ourselves to have the right information. Believe me, when I talk about going into the inspirational writing classes that I will be giving at Unity of Phoenix over January through April of 2020, and I'll go into details of that in a bit, that when I go through that, this is going to be a bottom line goal as far as what we're trying to do there, is to get away from the outside sources and make sure that we trust the information that's coming from within. Now, the other thing that's really important about this is to make sure that it is not just that we pray and meditate. Somebody says, hey, I pray, I meditate, I should be able to do all this. And no, guess what? It's not just prayer and meditation, it's having a pure mind in which we would not go out there and condemn other people, all right? that we wouldn't gossip about other people, that we wouldn't even think ill about other people. Now, is it possible to do that? No, we're human and we do that automatically. But the more that we can work toward getting away from having those sorts of thoughts is the higher spiritual guidance that we would be able to receive. All right, now here's the other one, and most people are going to go, but we have to remain in perfect balance physically. So it means that we would maintain a good diet, a good exercise program, and that we would be able to make sure that we are making healthful decisions by not, being out of balance with drugs, alcohol, food, whatever it happens to be. And so all of those things have to be in perfect alignment in order that the sacred gift can come through. Okay, so the rational mind is also the rational, physical, and spiritual side. This is the faithful servant. This is the temple of God right here in front of all of us. And it's not just the physical, it's the mental, the spiritual, all together in one package, and they all have to be in harmony with each other to have the highest spiritual guidance coming through. So we apply that which we believe, and then God will see that the rest comes to us. To back this up from the Cayce material, we have a question from a 52-year-old female who asks, what's the best mode of life for me to live to keep myself in the best physical and to lead a constructive life? Answer, first, bring to self the more perfect physical body in which to manifest the mental and soul capabilities of self. Then analyze self as in relationship to that it has and through what channel it has accomplished activities in the material plane. Now, this is just backing up what I said, that you really need to be able to have the physical in balance in order to be able to do a good job with the spiritual, mental and spiritual. There was a rather gifted psychic in the Scottsdale, Arizona area that I've known for decades. And please don't ask, she doesn't do readings any longer, but she did altered state readings, much like Edgar Cayce. Cayce certainly had, he was more of a television, she was more of a radio, but all the information that I heard her give, for the most part, was really pretty good. And so we were doing a series of psychic readings from her, and she and her husband had come over to my house where I had a little recording studio set up to be able to record them professionally. And that particular day, she had come over just after lunch, and it was the first time I had seen her not be able to get into an altered state. And we, let her try for about 20 minutes, and finally she said, well, I can get into an altered state, but I can tell that it will not be the highest guidance, so I really shouldn't do it right now. We'll have to reschedule. And I said, really? I said, what happened? And she goes, I knew I shouldn't have done it. When we went out to lunch, at the end of lunch, I had a nice salad, and everything was in, I think she had iced tea as opposed to a soft drink. But when it came to dessert, she said, oh, I'm going to indulge and have lemon meringue pie and a Pepsi. And apparently, that food in her stomach was creating enough chaos within her vibratory pattern physically that it didn't allow her to be the highest channel that she needed to be in order to be able to do that reading. And she psychically understood that and said, reschedule the reading, don't just give a bad one. And so not only do we have the Cayce reading, but I actually have had information from other sources that say, yeah, that it really does work that exact way. Okay, how can I develop my psychic power? By the intuitive forces that lie within, by the study very closely of those tenets as he has given in the 14th, 15th, 16th, and 17th chapters of John. Put thy trust in him, and he will guide thee aright in thine intuition, in thy expressions, in the psychic, or the soul forces of self. Let's, for the moment, illustrate these, and I inserted in the brackets here, illustrate these being automatic writing and inspirational writing, that the entity may gather as to what inspiration really means. It is not of influences without, but the answer to something within. The real inspiration is the arousing of a consciousness of that within. So, the Cayce reading suggests that we train ourselves to think right, to be healthy in body and mind before we attempt to help others by tuning in. And can we get the answers from other sources outside the divine within? The answer is, of course. But how high or how spiritual will the guidance be when we do that? It's very much like this little picture of the Holy Bible at the bottom. Haven't you found, I know I have, maybe you haven't, maybe you have, but if I go in there, I can find some of the most divinely inspired verses in there that are full of nothing but hope and love and light, not only for me, but for anyone else that would wind up reading it. And yet, there are some really ugly passages in there that says that, God hated. And I'm going, why would God hate, when you have this other side or perspective of God? Or that we should go out there and kill all the people of Jericho and take their lands, etc. I mean, those are things I don't think God was actually indicating, and yet both of them are in the Bible. I can guarantee you that God was only giving the highest guidance, and what wound up coming through the biblical authors, and certainly in Moses in that case, that it was filtered a little bit according to where their head was at the time. Now, this is shifting gears a little bit, but what I have here on the left is a Cayce reading giving a description of this person's life seal. And by the way, it's only a 13-year-old female that's asking for a life seal. Now, what is a life seal? I like to think of it as like a coat of arms, in which it's symbolic of the family name and all that, but the life seal is very symbolic of where somebody is on the spiritual path and what their spiritual mission, if you will, is in that particular life or at that time. It's not that a life seal can't wind up changing if you wind up making choices that take you in a very different direction, kind of like Saul of Tarsus, who became Paul. Right? He had a very definite change, and I'm sure his life seal wound up changing along with it. Well, let's take a look at this, and then I'll give you a background on the picture that you're seeing here. Please give my life seal and its interpretation. Answer: a tree that would be as of the willow type, above which is the cross with a crown over same. Upon same, over, but above, and upon same, see? So, in other words, here's the willow tree, and here's the cross, it's above the willow tree, and here's the crown that is, above the cross, if you will, and following what the verbiage is over here. Below to the left side and over the right side of same. Now, we're talking how the willow tree and the cross and the crown itself are going over the middle trunk as we have it here. All right, so the interpretation is as the growth of the body, the mind, to those that would supply, as through the cross, the glory and the beauty of the spiritual and the mental life in the cross, the Christ. So just going through, this is giving you the verbal description. Here's the visual description, and it's giving you, excuse me, the interpretation of what that's all about. Now, I actually commissioned this to be done. I had found this reading, and one of a friend of mine, my gosh, I've known him since I was, I think, 12 years old. He was a volunteer for working with my mother here on the West Coast for putting various projects together in using his artistic talents. As a matter of fact, he won a couple of Emmys for being able to do special effects on some of the Star Trek TV series. So he's really not only a talented guy, but recognized in the professional world for everything that he can do. So this is what he put together when I said, can you do this? And I also asked him if he would be willing to be a guest speaker in this upcoming series of classes that I want to give here at Unity of Phoenix on the 4th Tuesday of each month. He's going to be a guest speaker that will come in and start talking about how to not only do a life seal, but interpret one, and could even, and does life seals for other people. So, how do I get started with inspirational writing? First, it doesn't have to be limited to writing or typing. As you just saw, life seals are an artistic way of expressing the divine within. Poetry may come out of your connection rather than helpful and hopeful narratives like you get that are either written out or somebody gives as a discourse. So perhaps ideas come from music or other art forms as how you connect with spirit. So some people might write a poem that winds up being inspirational as opposed to just being if you were to take a straight dictation of what it is that I'm saying right here, you could wind up having somebody that does it in poetic, or it could be from music, or it could be a painting. It can be all of those things. So there are artistic expressions, creative expressions that are well beyond just words or the written word. And for those of you who are interested in learning how to do this, I will be doing the 4 sessions, as I said, the information on there. And please do contact me if you do want to be a part of that course. I need to know how many chairs to have them set up in the classroom out there.